Thank you.
Give me a second. You're going to be live on Zoom. Oh, I'm going to leave. Bye-bye.
What was that?
Oh, I was turning my camera off.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you for your patience and for being flexible. Sorry that I had to change the time. I originally thought our book club would be finished last week and got double booked. But since we're here, thank you for being flexible again.
And you still have a lot of very engaged audience, Mark. 247 now. Nice.
Well, welcome everybody. And for those of you who, a little bit later, I hope that was good for you. And if it wasn't, I apologize. And I'll make it up to you by helping you regulate your emotions better. So, how are we feeling? Or I think if you live in America, I think this is the week that we suppress all feelings. Does anyone agree with that? Yes, 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 yes. No. I'll let people jump on where people are coming in.
You're live on Facebook too.
All right, thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
So good evening, everybody. We're going to jump right in since some of you are having to stay up later than you normally would to do our book club this week. But today is, I think, an important topic, which is emotion regulation. I'm just curious, have any of you had, or have any of you been struggling managing your feelings over the last couple of days? Everybody, yes. Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes, 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 yes. Okay. So today's focus is going to be on chapter 8, which is on emotion regulation. And I think it'll be a fun one. And I think we can all use some maybe deliberate practice tonight. So I'm going to put up my slides because tonight I'm in professor mode. And some of you wrote me very kind emails last week that you were, as I said, I was in a little bit of rare form last week. And some of you like, are you sure you're okay? I'm doing okay, I promise you. I'm a little freaked out, but it's que sera, sera. So Ryan, I need to be able to share my screen. Give me some power, buddy.
Sorry, dude. Hang.
Someone's asking about my dog. So my cute little doggie came home from the hospital yesterday. Her hip was operated on, and today I had to force her to not want to play fetch. So I think she's doing great.
All right, back at you.
All righty, here we go. Can everybody see the screen? Yes, good. Okay. So today we're going to focus on emotion regulation, and I really want us to go into some detail with this. And so let's in the world. And it has multiple kind of components. So when we think about emotion regulation, we think about having goals and having strategies. Let's think about this right now. Do I want to prevent myself from being anxious and overwhelmed? Do I want to reduce my anxiety? Do I want to initiate anxiety? Which for some of you may think weird, but probably shouldn't say this and be recorded, but sometimes even with my students or our center staff, I want to induce a little bit of anxiety. It's like, it's good to be on your toes a little bit. Is that the expression, to be on your toes? I don't think so. What's that expression? Someone's going to get it right for me. To have people what? What's that expression? Keep you on your toes. Thank you, Clara. My prefrontal cortex and is completely kind of burnt. To maintain emotions. or to enhance on the edge of their seats. I like that one too. Thank you. That's a little different. That's what I want to have happen in my book club presentations, right? You're so curious and eager. All right, focus, Mark. Prevent unwanted emotions. Reduce the difficult ones. Initiate the ones that we want to experience or others to experience. Maintain emotions. And then enhance them. So that's the goal aspect of it. One thing that I think people oftentimes forget is that when we're experiencing an emotion, we're asking ourselves questions, right? Firstly, we're not judging the feeling, but we do have to ask ourselves, is this emotion going to best serve me in this particular situation? Or do I need to shift that feeling to be able to achieve a goal? So that's the goal aspect of it. The strategy aspect of it, to me, is the most important, because that's where we think about the thoughts and the actions in order to make informed decisions, build and maintain positive relationships. Here's something that I think is so important. For most of my life, I believed that my temperament was my emotional intelligence. And we might have spoken about this early on, but my point here is that we confuse our experience of emotion with our skill at dealing with our feelings or emotions. And they're completely different. I'll say that again. Our experience of emotion, our tendency, like me, to be a little bit neurotic and worried, is not the same as what we do with that feeling. Does that resonate with everybody? The distinguishing elements of emotional experience. So for example, I'm very easily startled as a person. I have a 5th degree black belt. I can protect myself. I'm just my system is a sensitive system. I'm easily startled. I can, very quickly worry about things. And I can allow that to just go, 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 go. Or I can pause, take a breath, say, Mark, are you really worried or are you just tired? What might you do differently? What emotion do you want to feel? That's the emotional intelligence piece. So last week I asked you to think about where you've been living on the mood meter. And this week I'm going to ask you, well, how have you been regulating? I'm going to ask everyone to do a little bit of a mindfulness exercise. This one is not going to be pleasant. Not all mindfulness exercises have to be pleasant ones. Just going to ask you to sit up straight in your seat. Take a nice long inhale and an exhale. And I'd like you to ask yourself, what have been your automatic go-to unhelpful strategies? What have been your automatic go-to unhelpful ones? Shutting down and going to sleep, eating, alcohol, eating treats, ruminating, eating chips, avoidance, food, stockpiling, cursing, eating, avoidance, laziness. Okay. Because it's just going down the list here. And so I think, a big part of my book and a big part of all of us developing our emotional intelligence, and in particular our emotion regulation skills, is that we have to become emotion scientists, compassionate emotion scientists, around the strategies that we use to regulate. Can we step out of ourselves and look down from the hot air balloon and notice, wow, Mark, every time you're worried, you eat the bag of cookies or eat the quart of ice cream, or every time you feel angry at your mother-in-law, you walk the other way. And so tonight, what I'm going to have us think about is how do we move from automatic, habitual, unhelpful strategies to more deliberate, helpful strategies. And I think there's some interesting challenges here. One, first I should ask you, well, you're withdrawing, you're worrying, you are overeating, you're too much sugar, fast food. Where do you think you learned those strategies from? Where do you think you learned those strategies? TV, parents, childhood, parents, family. Exactly. So when people say, well, is emotional intelligence innate or is it learned? What I say is our temperament and our personality is 90, 80%. There's some malleability there, but a lot of it is, built into our wiring, our sensitivity is kind of wired in big part. But our emotional intelligence skills, right, are learned, right? Think about it. Most of our unhelpful strategies come from the adults and other kids trying to define our reality for us. When I pause there for a minute, much of our unhelpful emotion regulation comes from the people who raise us in our surroundings, saying things to us, modeling things to us, doing things to us that we start believing. Shaming us. You're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too tall, you're too short, your nose is too big, your nose is too small. You're too dark, you're too light. Whatever it might be, is that we get defined by other people. And when it happens when we're very young, and we're not emotion scientists as kids, we can't sift through what people say to us. So we just assume it's true, and then we become that. This is why this work is so important from early on. This is why it's so important to not just have a program, right, in a school. It's about creating systems where everyone is emotionally intelligent. So our strategies come from people who didn't have EI training when we were young. These helpful strategies, right? They don't really require a lot of effort. Has anyone ever just said, like, go blank yourself to somebody? Like, go. It's so easy, isn't it? It's like, and you feel better when you do it sometimes. Maybe the last time you spoke to that person. Happens outside of awareness. Often become permanent bad habits. They feel good. But the problem, right, is what? They don't really help us solve problems. They really mess up our relationships. They derail us from achieving our goals, and they decrease our health and wellness. So when we're doing this work on the mood meter and we're trying to build our strategies, remember, we start off with understanding our experience of emotion. What quadrant am I in? Why am I there? What's the word? And that is the process of going from kind of the automatic to the cognitive. The strategy. Can I express myself? How do I want to feel? What strategy should I use to stay or shift? So we're going to talk about what I call the big seven. First, physiological regulation. Physiological regulation. Mindful breathing. Self-care. Healthy relationships. Managing your thoughts. Managing your life smartly. Doing meaningful things. Forgiveness. And there are many, many more, but we try to classify them and make it simple. So I'd like to start off with physiological regulation. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Because I think one of the most important things that we can learn in terms of emotion regulation is that When we're highly activated, it's biologically impossible to use a helpful strategy. Can I say, can someone write that for me in the chat? When you are highly activated, it is biologically impossible to use a helpful strategy. Thank you very much, Sam. I just think we have to own that, because that applies to you, and it applies to your kids, and it applies to your partners and relationships. When you're both highly activated, what happens is what? Sympathetic nervous system, right? Aroused, activated, right? Body prepares itself to what? Fight or flight. There's not a lot of processing there, right? There's not a lot of time to think, oh goodness, right? It's like when there's a fire. You don't like when there's a fire in your house, you don't be like, let me think about this. You think I should, what do you think? Should we leave the house? It doesn't work that way, right? You go into hypervigilant survival mode. And so when you're triggered by your loved one, your kids, anyone, and you get activated like that, what happens? You go into fight, flight, survival mode. It's when you say the thing that just makes you feel better, but you regret later. It's when you try to tell your kid to calm down or whatever, and they don't listen to you, and they spit at you, or they run out of the room and they start throwing a tantrum. And so what do we got to do? We got to learn how to deactivate. So you got to deactivate so that you can actually regulate, because the deactivation alone is not necessarily going to support you. It's going to help you come down, and then you've got to engage in other strategies, which is another interesting thing, that people think of emotion regulation as a single thing. But in general, we're using a range of strategies at once. Like we're taking our breaths, we're stepping back, we're gauging some problem solving. People like that deactivate to regulate. It's important. Now the question is, how much training do each of us have in deactivation? Literally, how much practice do we have in noticing our physiological arousal, our activation? Not saying something, not doing anything, but literally finding a way to deactivate by backing up, by doing breath work. So we're going to do that tonight. I need everyone to get good posture. Many of you have been practicing mindfulness exercises in your life. Today we're going to work on just basic breath count. So earlier we've done some where we've done some mantras or sayings. Today it's just going to be the breath count. Here's what we're going to do. When we breathe in, we're going to say the number 1. And when we breathe out, we're going to say the number 1. And then we're going to breathe in and say 2. And we're going to say out to say 2. We're going to do our best to get to 10. Now, if you get distracted, I'm going to ask you to start back at 1. You got to be honest with yourself and with me. So as you're breathing in and out, you say 1 and exhale 1, 2, exhale 2. Try to get to 10. If you get distracted, start back at 1. I'm going to put the timer on. We're doing this for just 2 minutes. I almost set it at 2 hours. Okay. Please get good posture. And on your own, Okay. Freeze or open your eyes, please. Just give me a yes or no. How many of you found it was tough to just be still for 2 minutes and just allow yourself to breathe in and out and counting to 10? So a mixed bag. How many of you noticed your mind's wandering? Yeah. So here's right what happens. Oftentimes when we get activated, our minds start racing and racing and racing and racing and racing and racing and racing. Now, if it's when there's a real fire in your house, yeah, you want to just get vigilant and find your way out. You want your brain to be highly stimulated and activated. But during COVID, with systemic racism, with fires, during elections, right, we're in this constant, and we're not giving ourselves, right, that ability to just be still. It's hard practice, but I recommend starting with 2 to 3 minutes. 1, single focus, counting from 1 to 10. We're going to try another exercise tonight. Now, this one is going to be on focusing on an image, and I'm going to give you the image. And for 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to reflect on the moon's reflection in still water. Okay. I'm going to ask you to just keep a single focus on one thing, which is imagine the moon's reflection in still water. Here we go. Okay, that was 1 minute. Let me ask you, was that harder or easier? Well, most people are saying it was harder. It typically is harder. Anyone want to guess why it's harder? Or it could be harder for some people. Some people added trees in a boat. It's because of our brains. It's busier. Our brains, you know, when you're counting, you're allowing yourself to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. It's a much higher level of practice. It's a much more challenging process to just keep your mind on one thing. Isn't it amazing though? How many of you can be on the Zoom with me right now, be thinking about your kids, be texting someone, and be emailing someone at the same time? So we're really so trained at compartmentalizing and splitting, but we have zero training in being still. I only asked you to do it for 1 minute, 1 freaking minute. And you want to know why we're all so overwhelmed and stressed out. Okay. Now we're going to try my go-to strategy, which is using phrases. So this is the one that I use to help me fall asleep at night. It's the one that I use to really get into the green quadrant. And we might have done this once before, I'm not sure. We're going to say the word in and out, and then deep, slow, then calm, ease, and smile, release. I will take you through it. Good posture, everybody. You don't need to say it. You're going to just listen to my words and absorb it. And you're going to breathe in with the first word and out with the second word. Here we go. In. And out. And deep. And slow. And calm. And ease. Put a little smile on your face as you breathe in. And release. One more time. In. And out. And deep. And slow. And calm. And ease. And smile. And release. Okay. How are you feeling now? Everybody's like zen, relaxed, awesome, lovely, ready for bed. So there are different purposes to these mindfulness exercises. Sometimes our goal is to just train our minds and get the practice of being still, which is the counting exercises. Sometimes it's to induce a feeling. So maybe looking at that moon's reflection, or thinking about a farm that you visited that you just love, or the ocean, or other kinds of images for visualization. And then sometimes you use phrases like the one that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is that in and out and deep and slow, as a way to just bring you into a certain quadrant, which would be right now green, to get us out of that deactivation stage. All right, listen up your shoulders a little bit. Listen up your neck. Stretch out your shoulders a little bit. So I think during these ridiculously uncertain times, we've got to give ourselves the permission to just do some of these practices. Because if you're overstimulated with the news, with looking at your freaking Twitter, social media, you're putting yourself, without realizing it, into the fight or flight mode all day long. I have to tell you, and I'm guilty of this, the last 3 days I've been working from my living room, my kitchen living room area, with the news on. And I'm a mess. Because it's just constant anticipation. What's happening? Oh my God, what's happening? Activated, 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 activated. Can anyone relate to this? Am I the only one who's just been like in a constant state of hypervigilance? And so this brings up just a really important kind of message for emotion regulation. Most of the time, we think of emotion regulation as reactive regulation. I'll repeat myself. We think of emotion regulation as reactive emotion regulation. We don't set ourselves up for success. I'm going to repeat myself. Most of the time we think of doing these exercises. People who go to mindfulness classes after they've had their nervous breakdown, they don't think, oh, the goal is from early on to train my brain to be still. We call the second proactive or prevention-focused emotion regulation. So kind of trying to anticipate, which is hard to do. Most of you, I think, participated in our study. Did you complete the survey about the forecast about the election? So we're going to, next couple of weeks, we're going to start analyzing data and give you your personalized feedback, which is really freaking cool. But point here, right, is that we can be reactive or we can be prevention focused. So for example, right now, during these difficult times, are you making an effort to surround yourself, virtually or in person, with the people who help you stay calm, to be present? That's a prevention strategy. You know, what we know from research is that, right, we really need to not call this like social distancing. It's really should be physical distance and social connection, right? The 6 feet apart, right? Yes, it's physical distance. The last thing we want is to be socially disconnected. And so we know from research something else, which is that the mere presence of someone that you feel connected to is a strategy. They don't have to say or do anything, right? So going back to my childhood, right, being around someone like my mother, unfortunately, who was high strung and who had a lot of stress contagion, I never really felt that settled. Being around my Uncle Marvin, just when he came over, my physiology changed. So the question is, are we seeking out the people who are those Uncle Marvins for us? And are we creating those conditions for our kids and our family members? Think about that for a minute, right? We're deactivating ourselves. We're being present, staying socially connected, but physically distant. So physiological regulation, the breathing exercises, the mindfulness work, the social connectedness aspects of emotion regulation, right? The mere presence of someone that we care about or that we know cares about us. The self-care aspects of it, right? Healthy eating, sleep, exercise. Maybe I should have asked you, how's your sleep been? Did anyone else get up in the middle of the night to check social media when it was the election night? exercise, eating healthy, psychological self-care. It's another aspect of emotion regulation. Are you finding yourself able to do things that you enjoy? One of the things that I think is really interesting about self-care is that oftentimes young people sometimes get triggered by it. They think, oh, only, wealthy people can do self-care work, go for a massage or take a fancy bubble bath. And I think the mindset around that self-care is completely wrong. This is not about, buying fancy products from Goop or whatever they are. I don't buy those, by the way. It is about taking 5 minutes to yourself to just take a little walk. Or make yourself a cup of tea in the afternoon and just be still and do your breathing exercise. Or reading a few affirmations that make you feel a certain way. Or journaling for 10 minutes. Listening to a song or two in the middle of the day. The last thing that we're going to talk about today is our cognitive work. So, as I said earlier, oftentimes our self-talk is defined for us by others. And what I want to end with is some tricks. So I don't know about you, but when someone says to me, Mark, just think positively about it. What is my response is usually something like, I'll give you positive. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a little insulting, right? Think positively. And so one of the things that interestingly research shows is helpful to cognitive regulation is pausing to think about what you might say or give advice, the advice you might give to someone. So what does that mean? It's like, it's very hard to think about like the positive things you might say to yourself, but it can be very easy to think about, well, if your best friend was feeling this way, what might you say? I'm going to share a quick anecdote from you that I just love. So when my book came out, I was on this book tour, and a mom came up to me at one of my presentations, and she said, Mark, you're not going to believe it. This stuff really works. And I said, tell me more. And she goes, well, I was with my son, and we were in the car, and he was really nervous because we were going to the dentist, and he was getting all anxious, and he was like freaking out, and he was like crying, and he didn't want to go to the dentist. And I just didn't know, what to say or do. And then I remembered from your book that maybe what I could just do is do a breathing exercise. So I said, honey, let's just take some breaths together to help ourselves. And then she's like, I couldn't think of anything he could say to himself. And then I remember the other thing. I could ask him, what might he say to his friend who was really nervous about going to the dentist? And so the mom said, honey, let's take a moment and think about, what might you say to your best friend, Robbie? And he sat there and he thought about it for a while, and he said, well, I would tell him this and I would say that, and I would let him know this and I would let him know that. And then the mom said to the little boy, well, honey, maybe you can actually say those things to yourself. And then she said she watched her son like sit there and process it for a minute. And then his son looked at his mother through the rear mirror and he goes, Mommy, you're a genius. And so the last little note for tonight about emotion regulation is that you don't have to always be the knower, right? You can be the compassionate emotion scientist with yourself. You can be the compassionate emotion scientist with other people. And so we don't have to like fill our brains with all these kinds of stories and like ways of talking to ourselves. We're naturally born to be empathic creatures. And so use that empathy, right, when doing the self-talk work Be empathic to yourself by thinking about what you would say to someone that you really care about. And what the research shows is that you'll actually come up with more strategies. And then maybe, just maybe, you can apply those to yourself. So final note for tonight. Probably many of you, without getting political, are struggling right now. You're feeling lots of intense emotions, right? You try to think about, I can't take it anymore. This is ridiculous. When is this going to be held? I can't take it, right? Give yourself that space to breathe. Instead of focusing on what, the electoral votes, focus on your breath. Focus on saying a beautiful phrase to yourself to help you be deactivated. Set yourself up for success by not watching the news every 5 minutes. Every couple hours is fine. And then when you're really struggling, after you've done those breaths, sometimes you just got to say, gosh, like what would I tell the person I love the most to think about or do in this situation? And just engage in that exercise. So on that note, I'm going to ask you all to take a nice long inhale and a nice long exhale. And remember a few last things. The first, emotion regulation is not about self-control. It's not about controlling your feelings. Emotion regulation is about using your emotions wisely so that you have well-being, so that you have good relationships, so that you achieve your dreams. Good night, everybody. See you next week.